the big innovation in American brewing hasn't really been from the brewers often, it's been from the hop breeders. Not only are you not drinking your father's beer, it's also people can see that you're not drinking your father's beer.
Well, hi everybody. I am at Sierra Nevada in Asheville, North Carolina with none other than Ron Pattinson. And I'm really looking forward to that. But before we get in the interview, listen, I am always trying to improve my videos, and I would love for you to just put something there in the comments. Just tell me, how do we improve and how do we make these better? That would really be super helpful. But today, let's talk about beer historian Ron Pattinson. And Ron and I are going to jump into some deep dives of the evolution of IPAs. And Ron is an expert in this area. We're going to be tasting 5 iconic brews from the iconic Orval all the way up through NA beers. And I think it's going to be a great adventure. So, and Ron's going to give us at the end kind of his forecast, what he thinks about the IPA. So I think that's going to be great. So welcome, Ron. This is awesome. I'm so glad to be with you on the same continent. Seems like we do everything online most of the time.
Yeah, well, it's what happens when you live in different continents.
Well, I'm so glad you're here. But listen, what do you think about, we're starting with the Orval. Does that make good sense?
Yeah, that makes good sense because that's most like the 19th century IPA.
All right. What about it makes it, as I understand the recipe goes back to 1931?
Well, I think because it's obviously seems to be an attempt to recreate an English stock IPA.
Ooh. I hope there's some beer in there. What does that tell you?
Well, it's been re-fermenting nicely in the bottle. That's the Brettanomyces for you.
We should look at the date code on that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, let's see what we see here. I think that is saying it was brewed in 23. What do you think?
Yeah, but either brewed, it's probably a bottling date, but bottled in 23, good until 28.
Yeah. So it's about a year old, or a bit more, hopefully a bit more. And that's going to be important.
Yes, because obviously the longer it's in the bottle, the more the Brettanomyces character is going to come out. So I'm going to get a bit of smell.
Yeah. Well, before we dive into it, you go ahead and taste yours if you'd like. I want to share a few highlights about this amazing guy. I've judged with him. We've had a lot of events together. Ron Pattinson is a renowned historian and author. He's known for his detailed writings and books on historical brewing techniques and recipes. He runs the popular blog Shut Up About Barclay Perkins, and he explores the history of various beers and styles and brewing practices. It's a great place to get historical recipes, and Ron goes right back to the source. So speaking of going to the source, I mean, we have something here that, what do you think represents a beer? And we said the recipe goes back to 1931, but do you think its origins are somewhat older than that?
Yes, and it's trying to, at least as far as I'm concerned, it's trying to imitate the original style of IPA, which was stock beers aged with Brettanomyces, which would have been extremely dry, and also the use of Goldings hops, especially the use of Goldings as dry hops, is very reminiscent of the practices of Burton brewers in the 19th century.
And so Goldings is an English hop?
Yes, Goldings are the classic English hop, the quality hop, mostly grown in Kent, particularly East Kent. Okay. And were always the most highly valued hops of UK brewers, so they tended to put them in their most expensive beers, and especially hop-accented beers like pale ales and IPAs. And also for dry hopping, it was very favoured because people liked the flavour of it.
So the officers in India that were getting this beer that were 2 years old, this is similar to what they would have?
Yes, probably more so if you left it another 6 months to 12 months.
Yeah, I got you.
But
cheers.
Well, cheers, yes.
Got to try this.
So you're starting to get the Brettanomyces come through on this.
Not real strong.
No, not really strong.
A little bit there. A little spicy, a little toasty, really dry.
Yeah, and you've also got the flavour of the Goldings coming through as well. Yeah. I think particularly from the dry hopping.
actually a little more bitter than I expected.
Yeah, it is quite a bitter beer. I mean, it's a hop-orientated beer.
But it's not unpleasant, but I guess I expected a little less.
Okay, well...
Yeah. But would that attenuate over time? Or do you think it had a 5-year shelf life? Do you think in 5 years the bitterness would be the same?
That's hard to say, because the weird thing is that when you're bottle conditioning, it's also to do with what's happening to the sugars, which sugars are being broken down by the Brettanomyces. So you can have the weird effect of the sweetness levels going up and down during a secondary bottle fermentation, especially when Brettanomyces is involved, which is slowly eating away at the complex sugars, breaking them down into other sugars, which will have different levels of sweetness.
You know, I'm not getting any of the leather or horse blanket. I'm mostly getting a little fruit off of it. Maybe it's tiny bit a little funkiness.
There's a little bit of funkiness in there.
Yeah, it's mostly spicy. Well, I like that. So this is a good starting point as we go forward, because we're going to move forward, 150 years when we look at the next one?
Yeah, and as you'll say, there's been quite a lot of development over 150 years.
Well, was it? I mean, that's really my question. So even though we're comparing a 1980s beer to a we know the recipe goes back to 1931, so almost 100 years for the recipe. You think it's representative at least another 50 years?
Yes, it seems to me it's a Belgian attempt to produce a classic English stock IPA.
Okay.
So that's going back, at least another 50 years, possibly another 100 years.
So when we jump forward, how many times did this change? May I pour this for you?
Oh, yes, thank you.
How much did you think this changed before Ken Grossman brewed this beer the first time?
Well, if you're looking at the changes in UK pale ales, then the big changes are drops in strength and changes in the recipe. So whereas a pre-World War II British pale ale was unlikely to have had crystal malt in it, ones after the war certainly did, and I think that's what Ken Grossman was inspired by. It was post-World War II British pale ales, which were quite different in character. So there's no Brettanomyces, they got crystal malt in them.
That's about the same color, though.
Yeah.
You think that had some crystal malt in it?
Orval? Knowing the Belgians, it's probably sugar that the colour comes from.
Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. Well, cheers on this.
Oh, cheers. And of course, one of the big differences is the hops being used. So rather than the very aromatic UK hops, here you've got the more straight-out bitter flavour of Cascade.
But I find it a different bitterness. It's also a little sweeter. Of course, with no bread in there, it's not as dry. Much more piney, citrusy.
Yeah, the very typical North American hop flavours. Mm-hmm. But still quite dry.
Yep.
So,
but not as dry as this guy.
No. But then again, there's no Brettanomyces in this one.
But it's also 90 years old.
Yeah.
So, what do you think? What was it about this beer that seemed, and I know what just this beer, but this beer really kind of was iconic, at least for the 80s, and still is now 45 years later. What do you think it is about that made this such a shock or made it stand out to really the world?
Well, it's because it's very different from, certainly in the US, it's very different from the other beers being made at the time. Where, I mean, you can see that over the years, the mainstream lagers in the US, the hopping rates keep going down and down and down and down and down,
right,
until there's virtually no hop flavour left. And then if you're used to beers like that, this, even though it's only got 38 IBUs, is going to be a bit of a shock if you're used to something that only has 15 or 16.
Yeah. So we made a quick change up. I decided we needed to get some more glassware on the table to make this keep going smoothly. So thank you for indulging me with that, Ron. So as we go back to our conversation, this was certainly an iconic beer that people even now maybe almost refer to it as the Pilsner of the, that it was so iconic and so standing out as such a beer that resonated around the world. And was it just the hops, or what was the difference between the Sierra Nevada Pale Ale and the Orval in the profile?
Well, I think that the big differences are the hops that were used, and the difference between Brettanomyces and no Brettanomyces. And so what I would say is that the Sierra Nevada, in English terms, it'd be what you'd call a running beer. That is a beer that you're meant to drink relatively fresh. You're not going to leave it around for any length of time. Whereas Orval's a stock beer, and it's one where some people prefer to leave it a couple of years before they drink it, which with Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, you wouldn't really want to do that, because after a year or so, or maybe even less than that, it's really going to start degrading, and you're going to lose the nice fresh hop character that's such a big part of the flavor profile.
I mean, that's the differences. What are the similarities between them?
Well, similarities, hop accented, relatively light in body, relatively dry in the finish.
Yeah.
So it's not like a big chewy stout or a porter where there's a lot of body, where they got a much thicker mouthfeel. These are things that are, in a way, quite easy drinking beers, which again, a beer's not going to hang around for a long time, I don't think, unless it's got a certain degree of drinkability, especially something that's a mass market beer. And I think it's a testament to how good the beer's was framed and originally formulated. The fact that even though it's 40 years old, it's still managed to maintain quite a strong following. And you look at most American beers, and they don't hang around for that long. That they come and go relatively quickly, and the breweries come and go relatively quickly. And this seems to be a beer that's had genuine staying power, and that's a sign of something that's been formulated well at the start. Because I think you were saying earlier that it took him quite a few attempts to get the recipe right.
It did, but it's my understanding he's hardly changed it since.
Well, once you get it right, then why are you going to mess around with it? It's still popular. If it isn't broken, why try and fix it?
Well, it both are re-fermented in the bottle, so that and both are essentially based on the same pale ale recipe, except the differences being kind of the crystal malt, and maybe the most more important ingredient being the American hops.
Yeah, and particularly the new breed of high alpha American hops. You see American hops turning up in pale ales back in the 19th century in the UK, but not flavor hops, just things that were just used purely for their alpha acid. Where the brewers didn't like the flavor, so they'd throw them all in at the start of the boil so they could get rid of what they called the nasty, blackcurrant leaf flavor, which they always said that cluster had.
Well, I know Ken Grossman told me once, he said I was trying to create an American flavor. Now, not all Americans, I think, gravitated to it at first, but eventually, as we all know, it has become one of the most popular beers in the world. How did people in the UK react to this American hop in the 80s?
I think people are intrigued by the new flavors that you could get from it, and so you see people starting to experiment with using cascades. I think relatively early on, also back in the 1980s, because it offered something different from the English hops that people were used to, and so it offered the chance to get a different flavor profile, and yeah, there's always been it's interesting if you look historically, there's always been a back and forth between English and American brewing, and you see both influencing each other backwards and forwards over the centuries. And I think this is an example of a more recent influence coming eastwards across the Atlantic.
Well, we've asked several times about not wanting to drink your father's beer, and I don't know that wasn't one of the aspects that really drew people to such a different beer in the 80s, because it was quite different than the primarily light lagers that were all around. But as we move forward, eventually we had another generation behind that, and this gets back to the drinkability question, but may I pour you a Torpedo Extra. Now, the Torpedo Extra was kind of the beginnings of yet another phase of the IPA, wasn't it?
Yeah, so this is when people start indulging in what was called the IBU-Wars, where people are trying to make ever more bitter beers. I mean, sometimes I think only theoretically more bitter beers, because I think a lot of the IBUs that were listed on labels are a bit of a fantasy, and they were purely calculated ones, but...
So do you not expect this to be more bitter?
Yes, I expect this to be more bitter.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This one doesn't taste as fresh.
No.
Oh well. I didn't get it from the gift shop, so that might be...
I'm getting a bit of oxidation in there.
Yeah, I'm getting a little oxidation in this one too. I have a second one in there I may go get. Let's go.
Well, cheers. Oh, this is much better.
Much better.
That's what I expected.
Yes.
So it's like a whole nose full of the tropical hop flavor. Well, I mean, here you've got the next generation of American hop flavors. So when you're going from the citrus flavors, we're getting more the tropical flavors coming in from the types of hops that they developed later on, when people were going for, ever more fruit flavors in their hops. Now, I've argued with people before that the big innovation in American brewing hasn't really been from the brewers often, it's been from the hop breeders. Oh. And without the hop breeders, you wouldn't have this whole range of flavors that you have in modern beers.
So it's a much more complex, it isn't just bitterness, there's a lot more complex fruit flavors. I find it a bit sweeter.
Yeah, but that could well just be because it's a higher gravity beer.
Okay.
So you're likely to have more residual sugars.
I could drink the heck out of that.
It's very nice.
And I really thought, just comparing it against the pale ale, and I've never done a lineup just like this. I thought I would find it less drinkable, but it's actually quite drinkable.
Yeah, it's not ridiculously bitter.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got a very distinct, lasting bitterness, but it's not something that's going to completely blow your head off.
Yep. That kind of gets us to the IBU-Wars and the challenge that, and as you said, the numbers were kind of crazy, but I don't know that the numbers always matched with reality. But certainly, in general, bitterness was more important than anything. It was the priority. You wanted the highest possible number and still have a drinkable beer. And people loved that for a while, but again, we have this next generation that coming up, and they didn't want their father's bitter beer.
Yeah, I mean, I know from a few years back on things like Rate Beer and Beer Advocate that people were completely obsessed with bitterness levels. And then at a certain point, that seemed to completely change. And then it became all about the hop flavor and not the bitterness.
Which kind of brings us to the next one. Can I pour you a hazy little thing?
Yes, you certainly can.
All right, so hazy little thing is maybe the most different beer we have in the group, isn't it?
All right, here I'm getting lots of fruit flavors, but something almost vegetal, which I suspect might be just from the very, very large amount of hops that just adding a lot of vegetable matter because you've got such a high quantity of hops.
Mm-hmm. But it's definitely juicy, tropical, certainly none of the pininess, none of the resiny.
No, it's mostly a lot of the tropical fruit flavors that you're getting.
Yep. And it's definitely hazy. I thought it might be a little hazier. Well, cheers.
Cheers.
That's easy drinking too.
What strength's this one, by the way?
I think it's over 6. Here we go. 6.7.
Oh, okay.
That tastes like 6.7.
So it's basically halfway between the pale ale and the torpedo in strength.
That's right. That's right. Very drinkable. I expected a little sweeter. It really isn't.
And it still does have a reasonable amount of bitterness to it in the finish.
Not as much as the Torpedo, though.
No.
Not as much as the Torpedo Extra. And I'm not sure it has as much as the Pale Ale either. I would say it is the least bitter of all of these beers. Certainly more juicy and fruit forward. It's not piney at all. And it looks different. And when we were talking earlier, you pointed out that looking different might have been really important.
Yeah, so I think you see this all the time when you have new beer styles becoming popular, that often they look distinctly different from the one that preceded it. So you can see that when people start moving, say in the 19th century, from porter over to mild ale, you're going from a dark beer to a pale beer at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously mild became darker later on. And then after World War II, you see in the UK, the move from dark mild to a much paler bitter. I think it's important that not only you're not drinking your father's beer, it's also people can see that you're not drinking your father's beer.
Yeah, and that's certainly quite different. Certainly quite different.
And this is one of the things about having glassware rather than opaque drinking vessels,
Yep.
that the colour becomes much more important and becomes much more a selling factor than it was previously. You can certainly see that in English beer, that towards the end of the 19th century, when you have glassware becoming the standard way of drinking in pubs, that brewers are much more aware of the colour, and that's when you see mild become darker, is when glassware comes in. Because, then you can see that it's dark, whereas small differences in colour, you can't really tell if you're drinking out of a stoneware vessel.
Well, the interesting thing is, as I talk to breweries, they are saying that there is a very satisfying aspect to a juicy. That there is a feeling of not drinking more than one pint, and that's not necessarily popular with anybody. There are always exceptions, but as a result, they're seeing a trend back towards the West Coast IPA. You agree with that?
I've heard people saying this. I mean, personally, I like a classic West Coast IPA.
Yeah.
And I normally don't drink the hazy ones, but this one's actually quite nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not too ridiculously hazy, and it's still got a head.
Yeah.
Beer that looks like orange juice. Well, I don't want people to think I'm a kid when I'm in a pub and I'm just having a soft drink.
There it goes back to appearances, doesn't it?
Yeah. And beer appearance is very important. And it suggests things to drinkers as well. And so if you have a dark beer, people automatically think that it's thicker, that it's heavier, that it's stronger. And even if the flavour and the actual beer isn't anything like that, the appearance suggests something to drinkers. And that's very important as well. It's not just purely about perception.
Right.
It's also about expectations and what's being suggested to you by the appearance of a beer.
So it's interesting, as we look at the trends and the popularities that shift, I mean, none of these have been off-putting. We've enjoyed every single one of them.
Yeah, but you have to remember there are also beers that have been around for a while.
Right.
And where they're and from good quality breweries. I think you could have picked beers in these styles from different breweries, and it wouldn't have been such a satisfying experience to drink them.
Yeah. But as we look at these, and we're looking at trends, and this roughly is iconic to a 150-year-old beer, still a fabulous beer. We still enjoy it, but its popularity is not what these are.
No.
Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is very, very popular, but actually it is being somewhat displaced by Hazy, is my understanding. Hazy Little Thing. Torpedo continues to be popular and represents the West Coast style of IPA. So, but there are trends, and these go up and down in popularity. The next one, and you and I kind of discussed this one, and really were unable to settle the discussion. To me, I felt like we could look at the NA IPA as the next iteration of IPAs, because even though it's a small market segment, it is its time seems to be perfect. And it seems to me to be kind of the next generation IPA, but you didn't agree with me, which is okay.
I'm old. I've seen these things come and go, and every 10 years ago or so, people say, "Oh, non-alcoholic or really low alcohol beer, that's going to be the next big thing. It's really going up." And yeah, it happens for a while, and then it just collapses back down again.
Well, have you had Sierra Nevadas before?
No, I haven't. So,
Cheers.
cheers.
Let's give it a taste. See what you think.
See, I don't know how they make this, whether they take the alcohol out, but this smells a bit warty to me. So a bit like unfermented wort.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, with similar hop flavors to the hazy little thing.
Yeah, it is.
So I'm guessing they're using similar hop varieties and hopping it in a similar way.
Yeah.
It smells nice, but in the mouth there's just nothing there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's... Yeah.
So as far as you're concerned, this is not where IPAs are going next.
No, I think I think non-alcoholic beers are always likely to be a niche. I think there's a market for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't think they're ever going to be 30% of beer sales or anything like it. There's always going to be some people who, want something that don't want to drink anything alcoholic for whatever reason. They're driving.
Yeah.
That you might be pregnant and want to drink a beer.
Mm-hmm.
So I can see why there are circumstances why you might want to drink a beer that's not alcoholic. Personally, I just prefer to have a non-alcoholic drink.
Yeah. Or have, a Coke or whatever.
Yeah, and if I wanted something that wasn't going to get me drunk, well, then I'd go for a 3% beer.
Yeah, yeah. I like those too, but at least in the U.S., that seems to be a niche that this can't happen.
Yeah, well, Mike Karnofsky at Zebulon, I remember being with him once, and he gave me this 2.7% beer. And I said, "How on earth can you sell this?" And he said, "Oh, I don't sell it. This is just for me to drink." So it's just for when he's brewing. He doesn't want to get drunk. So he just has a 2.7% beer because you've still got the full beer flavour. It's not something that's just incredibly thin, but it's not going to have you falling over. So, I mean, for me, that's something that I can see more of a market for, because then you're not compromising as much with the beer. You've still got a proper beer,
right?
But something that's not going to get you falling over drunk. And yeah, maybe that's the future. Though I know they tried with Session IPA and it didn't get very far.
No, but I like this. I had this at our lunch because we're going to do this interview and I wanted to make sure it went well, even though it basically was the same price as the other beer. I don't expect an NA beer to be as good as the same beer with alcohol because of it's just, I think, pretty much impossible. But personally, I think this is a very drinkable IPA and enjoy it. And I think it works well. But it does have many of the points in my perception that you pointed out too.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of aroma, it works very well.
Yeah.
But I just find it very disappointing in the mouth. So, whereas, if you have a nice low gravity but alcoholic beer, you can get a reasonable amount of mouthfeel and body without having huge amounts of alcohol. See, I drank milds when I was younger. Mild, you can have a really nice full-flavored beer that's only 3% or even below.
Yeah.
And it's something that will give you the full beer drinking experience.
Well, as we go through this then, we've covered, 200 years of style evolution. What do you think is going to be next? If it's not NA, what do you think? I mean, with Brett and IPAs, I mean, if we go back 200 years, that's pretty different.
Yeah, well, I know from having produced an IPA with Goose Island, a stock IPA with Brettanomyces in it, and how much it confused people. I I don't really know. And the other problem is to produce a proper stock pale ale, you're going to have it stored for a year or so to let the Brett develop. And that's an expensive business. And I'm not so sure that you're going to ever be able to have a really large mass market beer that's brewed that way. Maybe people will do it like Orval, where you don't age it before you bottle it, and it's up to the consumer to let it age if they like the Brett flavor, which is what people do with Orval.
Yeah, but Orval's not a big seller, so and unless Orval makes a comeback, I don't see that being it. So what do you think? What other ingredients do you think brewers could add so the Hazy or the West Coast they don't want to drink their father's IPA?
Yeah. Well, of course, one of the possibilities is IPA just goes completely out of fashion and they stop calling beers IPA.
Even after 200 years, do you think IPA could disappear?
Yeah, loads of other beer styles have.
Yeah. Porter
disappeared in Britain.
Yeah.
And that had a much longer run. That had over 200 years. You had that going from 1720 to 1940. And it just disappeared without trace eventually. You have brown ale that, modern brown ale only appears in 1900, only brewed to any extent in 1930. And by 1980, it pretty much disappeared.
Whoa.
So, yeah, beer styles can have very short runs. IPA's done well.
Yeah.
But
not better than porter.
Not yet.
Not yet. Do you? What's your hunch? Do you think IPA will continue, or do you think it could tail off like porter did?
I think it's getting towards the end of its run, personally.
You think Hazy might do it in?
Well, and maybe I'm not as imaginative as brewers, but I can't see there's many other places for it to go, because we've already had black IPA and rye IPA and cold IPA.
Yeah.
All of which sort of made an impact for a while and then disappeared again. I mean, who makes a black IPA nowadays?
Hardly anybody. But I actually liked them. I mean, I thought they were, I like dark beers, but I'm unusual in that way. Dark beers just aren't that popular.
Well, I mean, it's also the thing about black IPA, people thinking it was something new. I've read a text from, I think, about the 1880s, where someone's talking about the stouts brewed in Burton, and they say, well, these aren't proper stouts. These are just black IPAs.
Well, and some American stouts can be exactly that.
Yeah, so I mean, to me, black IPA, I had some, and I was thinking, well, what exactly makes this different from a hoppy stout?
Yeah.
And you think, well, why is it called black IPA? It's because the IPA name sells.
So essentially, it's this dead end that brewers may hit, where there's just no new directions to take the style, and therefore it dies out because it just has no legs. It's got nowhere else to go.
Yeah, and especially in the modern world where it's very dynamic and styles come and go very quickly. Yeah, who knows what's going to happen? I mean, if I could predict it, I'd make a fortune, because then I'd go and start a brewery brewing what's going to be the next big style.
But it's fun to talk about. Well, as we wrap up, we're here at the beautiful Sierra Nevada Brewery. Anything that was particularly memorable? We went on a tour this morning.
I like the hop room. That was really nice. There was a lovely smell in there, and I like the fact that it was all whole leaf hops.
Yes.
So I'm very old-fashioned. I like whole leaf hops. One of the best beers I've ever had was a mild ale. So an 1830s mild ale recipe.
Yeah.
That was 10.5% ABV and I think 120 IBUs, which was purely done with whole leaf Goldings. And the hop flavor was just absolutely magical. And I had the same beer brewed by the same brewery where they used pellets instead of whole leaf hops, and it was nothing like as good. So I'm impressed that they stuck with whole leaf hops there.
Well, before we go to the rapid fire questions, we had 5 beautifully brewed beers. One that wasn't packaged so well, but we fixed that.
Yeah.
But 5 beautifully brewed beers. Which one was your favorite? Do you have a favorite of what we tried today?
I quite like just the classic Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Though I was surprised at how much I like the Hazy Little Thing.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to beat the classic. Well, Ron, this has been fantastic. I'm going to give you a cheers here with the Torpedo, the West Coast IPA, which really seems to be rising back in popularity.
Well, that's good. It means I'll be able to get hold of it more easily.
It's been so much fun having you here in the United States and Asheville. I think you've got an event you're going to tonight. You got another event tomorrow.
No, not tomorrow, Sunday.
And what is your latest book, and how can people get a hold of it?
My latest book is Blitzkrieg,
Yeah.
which is about brewing during World War II, and which you can get from Lulu or you can order it from my blog, Shut Up About Barclay Perkins.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And if you've got some comments or questions for Ron, put them right down there in the comments. Would love to hear your thoughts on these iconic beer styles. And check out these videos on screen that have been picked out just for you. To everybody out there, thank you so much, and cheers.